All right, here we go, everybody. The best decks for the World Championships 2024. Of course, Worlds is this weekend in Honolulu, Hawaii, the biggest tournament of the year. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at what I think are the best decks for the tournament. I've already done a tier list video ranking where I think the meta is right now. I've looked at some online tournament results, but for this World's content coverage, I want to look at what I think are going to be the best decks for the tournament this weekend. We're going to see some big meta developments, I think, within the format, because nobody really knows what the truly best deck is right now. We all know what the best decks are, or at least we know what's going to be popular and what might dominate, but we don't exactly know what the best deck in the format is, and I definitely wanted to kind of clear the air and talk about what I think the best decks are right now, the best deck maybe even is right now going to the format, my opinions and all that in today's video. If y'all are new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We are getting close to 16,000 subscribers. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the main channel down below and all that good stuff. And leave a like if you go on to enjoy the video. And I'm super excited, and let's delve into it here in the video. All right, starting things off, we have Ancient Box. And I put Ancient Box at the very bottom of the list because while the deck does have its power, it's a very strong, hard-hitting one-prize deck, it does still have its inconsistency issues. I'm not sure it's as fantastic into stuff like Charizard and Reggie Drago as most decks are, but it definitely is probably like the best one-prize attacking deck right now. One-prizers, I think, kind of struggle right now in the format as top-tier contenders due to the power levels of stuff like Drago and Charizard, but Ancient Box has always been a pretty solid, just deck. Like, it's not really the worst deck you could bring to this tournament, in my opinion. Gardevoir is one of your better matchups, and Gardevoir is going to be pretty popular at Worlds, in my opinion. It's predicted to be one of the best decks for the tournament, and I do think you have an okay matchup in a Gardevoir. If Gardevoir starts cutting Unfair Stamp due to Pheasantipity being popular, maybe all of a sudden they're playing Hyper Roma or Neutralization Zone, and all of a sudden Ancient Box becomes even better into Gardevoir. There are some murmurings of that being a possibility. Ancient Box does have a better matchup into those big basic decks like Raging Bolt. I think it's pretty good into any like Ogre Pawn deck. It's good into Maridon, good into Shempow. Like, all these big EX2 price decks is pretty good into. If for whatever reason you end up playing against a Lost Zone deck, that's another decent matchup. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this deck is held back potentially by just how scary Drago and Charizard both are going to be. Charizard is probably a lot more beatable than Reggie Drago is due to Charizard not playing Bibarel and kind of leaning more into those two-prize big basic Pokemon like Rotom and Pheasantipity. Whereas your Drago matchup might be a little close due to Reggie Drago having Kyurem at Dragapult, and even Noivern if they really want to, in all honesty, and also Goodra being a big problem for the deck. So it does have its issues. It is fairly strong. I will say this, adding Petron EX into Ancient Box does give you a pretty good matchup into Snorlax, because all of a sudden, Snorlax has no way to beat you. As long as you can constantly use Petron and Roaring Moon over and over again, you literally can't lose to Snorlax. So you do take a good matchup into Snorlax now, which is nice. And I do like that, Snorlax is, spoiler alert, predicted to be a pretty good play for the tournament, and, it's a little bit higher up on this list than some of you might think. So I definitely think gaining a good Snorlax matchup all of a sudden isn't bad, but Ancient Box at the end of the day is just, it is what it is. It's inconsistent sometimes. It might struggle into Drago and Charizard, but I want to see where the deck ends up going at the World Championship. Next up, we have Dragapult. Now, I love me some Dragapult. I love me some Dragapult Charizard, but I do think Dragapult has slipped a little bit within the rankings. I do think that it is still an okay deck right now, but going into the World Championships, it does take some pretty awkward matchups. I'm not sure your matchup into Lugia and Reggie Drago are very solid. Dragapult, well, it's not the same thing as Charizard. It kind of takes that similar Reggie Drago bad matchup like Charizard does. One of the big things holding Charizard back right now, ultimately, is your Drago matchup seems to be pretty bad, and Dragapult kind of has the same issues where your Drago matchup seems to be kind of bad, and I think that's a big deal for anybody who wants to play Dragapult this weekend. I do really like Dragapult, though. It's a decent deck still into Gardevoir, especially if you play Charizard. Now that you have Dusknoir in the deck, if you choose to play Dusknoir over Charizard, or if maybe you can try to fit both in the deck seems good into Gardevoir. Your Zard matchup's always been pretty favored. You still probably have a good Charizard matchup. Your matchups into the other big basic decks, like I think Maridon's not a bad matchup. Potentially Raging Bolt could be a little tricky, but I'm not sure that it's unwinnable if you play, Charizards in the deck. Dragapult just feels like it just kind of got a little bit weaker, though, due to how good Drago is. And like I said, that Drago matchup is scary. The Lugia matchup also seems kind of scary. Even if you tech in Hammer/Temple of Sinnoh, I still don't think you're beating Lugia all the time. I think Lugia can still easily run Dragapult over. And I love Dragapult, but it does feel like it might have got a little bit weaker for the tournament. I'm not sure if it's better with Dusknoir or it's better with Charizard. Charizard might still be the better way to play the deck because Charizard still gives you a really strong late-game attacker that kind of offsets Dragapult's weaknesses. So honestly, if I was going to Worlds, I would probably still consider playing Dragapult Charizard. I mean, I just love the deck personally, but still feels like it's an okay deck right now within the format. But yeah, Dragapult as a whole just feels like it's a bit weaker than it should be. Definitely isn't the worst deck you can play to the tournament, but when you're taking weaker matchups into the bigger decks like Drago and Lugia, I'm not as sold on the deck. It's not a bad deck by any means, but I don't know, some of the top decks right now just kind of seem to scare me off of wanting to play it, but I still like the deck, and I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody do well with Dragapult at the World Championships. I think it's still going to happen. I just don't think that it's the deck that everyone's going to be like, thinking about playing to the tournament. I don't think that many big players are going to be playing Dragapult this weekend. All right, next up is Quad Thorns. Ironically, Quad Thorns is actually pretty well positioned within our format, and I had to include it within the top 10 because I think Quad Thorns actually might see play at Worlds. Now, I don't think it's going to be popular by any means. It's not really like the best deck ever. It's, very weird and clunky, but overall, the deck is strong. I mean, you're literally just playing a Pokemon that stops your opponent half the time from being able to play the game. Like, if you're playing against Lugia and they're not playing Flutter Mane, you flat out just auto-win the Lugia matchup. Your matchup into Drago isn't terrible. Your Zard matchup isn't terrible either. Your matchup into Raging Bolt isn't terrible. You're just kind of taking these solid matchups across the board. Now, I'm not saying Drago is like, completely broken or anything, because it does have counters. I do think Reggie Drago playing Canceling Clone does make the matchup slightly harder than it should be. So, Drago, well, I think it actually should still be okay for Iron Thorns. If they can find their Canceling Clone in time, I think that matchup becomes a lot harder, because they can, Canceling Clone and then Legacy Star for the clone back and make things complicated for you. Gardevoir could be scary if they're playing Klefki Flutter Mane or double Flutter Mane. That matchup becomes a lot harder. Charizard could be playing Canceling Clone this weekend. That's another big scary thing for Iron Thorns, is if Charizard starts to play Canceling Clone, and I think there is a good chance Charizard might play one Cologne in their decks this weekend. That's another big issue for Iron Thorns EX, is Charizard having Clone. So while the deck is very strong, I can't really warrant putting it any higher on this list, because I think the deck is strong, but there's too many things decks can do right now to counter Iron Thorns. Kind of gets caught in the crossfire of these Mimikyu, Ogerpon, wall strategy things people are going to be trying to throw your opponent. Like I said, good chance Charizard might be playing a clone this weekend. Drago already plays a Canceling Clone. Gardevoir does have its answers. There are ways to beat it. Iron Thorns is still a very grindy deck, though, to play against. Whether or not you have actual counters to it, the deck is still very grindy and can still win games due to how grindy it is. Sometimes you get lucky with a Judge. Sometimes you get lucky with a Crushing Hammer coin flip. I think the deck is still good, but I'm just saying, be prepared for people to actually be respecting the deck and actually have a little bit more counters to the Iron Thorns deck this weekend. But it's still not a bad deck, and if you're expecting a lot of Lugia, you know what, this could be the deck to bring to the tournament. All right, next up is Maridon. I actually think Maridon is pretty well positioned for the World Championships. It is not that bad for this weekend. It does gain some new upgrades. I think Pheasantipity, Academy at Night, both really good inclusions in the deck, especially the Pheasantipity really makes Maridon so much more stronger and consistent. I think the addition of adding Dusknoir and Dusclops in the deck also makes the deck even stronger. Maridon is a strong deck right now, in my opinion. I think that it's pretty solid for this tournament. You take a good matchup into Lugia. I think your Guardian matchup is fine. Now that you have Pheasantipity and Mew in the deck, your Guardian matchup, in my opinion, is a lot better. Yeah, I think it's a solid play for this weekend. It's not a bad deck whatsoever. It's not the best deck of all time or anything. It's still Maridon at the end of the day. You're still kind of playing the lottery with Electric Generator. You don't really have any late game energy acceleration system. That's where the Blood Moon comes in play, though. And while you might take in a bad Charizard matchup, it's not that bad. I mean, going second into Charizard is fine. Now that we can play Dusknoir in the deck and Charizard is playing all these bigger two-prize liabilities like the Rotom and the Pheasantipity, you have ways to go around the Charizard anyways without needing to play Raichu or anything, which is a big deal for Maridon. I think Maridon overall is not bad right now. And I think that's one of the things that tells me on it. It is one of my personal favorite decks to play right now within the Shrouded Fable meta. Even your Reggie Drago matchup isn't that bad. Drago tends to go first, which is what Maridon wants to see. And sometimes you can cheese a knockout on a Reggie Drago V pretty quickly before they evolve. Yeah, I think Maridon, honestly, is not in a bad place right now. Yeah, it does have to play the lottery, though, with Electric Generator, which is a big deal. And that's the only thing that really holds the deck back from being any higher on the list is it's a bit of an inconsistent deck sometimes. Sometimes your generators get no energy. You can play 15, 16, 17 lightning in the deck. Generator still sometimes whiffs, which is a bad thing. But Maridon definitely, when it works, it works. And I think that out of the big basic decks in the format right now, it does take better matchups into Gardevoir and Lugia, where something like Raging Bolt might not take as good of a matchup into those decks. I think its Drago matchup is even. Your Zard matchup might be slightly unfavored, but I still think you can beat it, especially if you have Dusknoir in the deck. It does help the matchup a lot more. I really think Maridon is not that bad of a deck going into the World Championships. Wouldn't be surprised if somebody had a decent run with this deck, and we'll have to talk about that in the prediction video, but I definitely want to gas up Maridon a little bit here. All right, next up we have Raging Bolt, which just barely edges out Maridon here on the list for the big basic decks. Raging Bolt is a lot more stronger than Maridon. In general, it has an energy acceleration system. It's more consistent at taking big knockouts. It's not really trying to cheese prizes with Iron Hands or anything like that. It is more faster than Maridon too because of the ability to spam all the draw within the deck. And Raging Bolt is honestly in a pretty solid spot. One of the things that really sells me on the deck is that you have a really strong Reggie Drago matchup. Out of every deck in the format, I think, you probably have the best Reggie Drago matchup. Now, Reggie Drago does have Radiant Charizard, which is a big deal, but I think if you want to play a deck that beats Reggie Drago, I really think Raging Bolt is the deck to play. I don't think Reggie Drago is going to be playing Noivern this weekend. Even if they are, it's not that bad. You have Prime Catcher and Boss. It's not the end of the world. And Reggie Drago's playing Noivern. They're probably going to be playing Penny and Turo, which really makes their deck a lot worse. So a lot of the time, you're just going to beat Reggie Drago flat out because Raging Bolt is just that strong of a deck. And it also just is a deck that, well, it does have its quote-unquote bad matchups. I don't think your Guardian matchup's good. Your Charizard matchup's not that great either. And, you know, even your Lugia matchup can be a challenge if they set up against you. But the thing that really makes Raging Bull work is just how strong and consistent it is at putting on the pressure on your opponent. Sometimes that's all you need to win a game, even if your deck is slightly underpowered against these other decks. Like Gardevoir should in theory beat you, but if you make Gardevoir go first and they kind of fumble a little bit, you can really run them over. Same thing with Charizard. Your Charizard matchup has never been fantastic in theory, but if you make Charizard go first and they have a slow setup, then Raging Bolt a lot of the time just wins the game because you're so far ahead. And I think that's ultimately what makes Raging Bolt work right now, is how it can overpower a lot of these decks that quote unquote have good matchups into Raging Bolt. Like even Lugia. Like if Lugia goes first against you, which most of the time they will, if they just have the one Lugia on the board, you can just go Pokemon Catcher, Prime Catcher, flip heads, knock out Lugia, and the game might just end on the spot. So yeah, Raging Bolt is that deck, and I think it definitely will be a decent play for Worlds. I think it's going to be popular for Worlds, maybe not super popular, but I do expect some people to bring it due to how strong it actually is. And like I said, taking a good Drago matchup does really sell me on the deck. All right, into the top 5. And honestly, this top 5, I think, is pretty solidified, in my opinion, as to where I think the meta is going into the World Championships. But anything, below the top 5, honestly, you could move places around where decks could be. But this top 5, I think, is decent. And starting out in the top 5 is Snorlax. Now, yeah, Snorlax is a good pick for Worlds. No surprise. I think this deck actually has a really good matchup into most of the big decks right now, other than Lugia. And I think Lugia is going to be the one deck that holds Snorlax back a little bit. But even then, I think Lugia is not unwinnable. If you play like Giacomo and stuff, it's not that bad. It is still scary, but if you have Temple Giacomo, the matchup becomes a little bit better. But yeah, Snorlax, I think it's well positioned for Worlds. I think you have a good matchup into Zard. Zard is a great matchup, obviously. It's always been. I think your matchup into Drago isn't bad. Drago can tech for Snorlax, which is a bit of an issue, but overall, I think Snorlax is well positioned for the World Championships. You can tech for Gardevoir. A big popular card Snorlax has been playing in order to beat Gardevoir is Picnic Basket, which could see play within the deck to counter that deck. And overall, yeah, Snorlax is a very strong play for Worlds. Ironically enough, there will be a few Snorlaxes that do well at the World Championships. I was a little bit skeptical on it at first, but honestly, looking at it and the more I think about it and, looking at the data, yeah, Snorlax definitely is going to be a big deck at the World Championships. It's going to do well. It's going to see play. There are going to be some big names who will probably play it. It is definitely a deck you have to respect for this tournament. I think if you're going to the tournament taking a bad Snorlax matchup, you're probably not going to win the tournament because, well, there's going to be some Snorlax that do well. So your deck needs to take somewhat of a decent matchup into it. You have to play counters to it. You have to respect Snorlax this weekend. It is going to see play. It's going to be popular potentially. Maybe not it's not going to be popular, but it will be fairly popular among the big players in my opinion. So definitely respect Snorlax this weekend. And if you're not, I don't know, man, you might not have a great time this tournament. But yeah, Snorlax, hate to say it, it's looking pretty good for the World Championships. Next up here, we got Lugia. Now, I really think Lugia is going to be popular. And out of all the decks that are going to be, like, quote-unquote popular, I do think it'll be both Lugia and Reggie Drago, and then probably Charizard just behind it. Those are going to be the 3 most popular decks of this tournament. But I don't know how good Lugia actually is. I would put Lugia higher on this list. It could be solidified as a top 3 deck, to be honest with you. It does have a good Drago matchup. Even your Guardian matchup's like okay. Your Zard matchups, it's like kind of close. But I do think that Lugia has one big problem right now. The deck can be a huge, inconsistent mess of a deck. And that is the one thing that really holds Lugia back, is that this deck kind of sucks sometimes. Like, it actually just is a bad deck most of the time. Like, maybe like 30-40% of your games, Lugia does absolutely nothing, and you're just sitting there reading the wind for 2 turns, and by that point, you've probably already lost the game. Not to mention, it isn't that hard to tech for Lugia. There's a good chance the big decks are going to be playing cards like Hammer and Temple of Sinnoh, which are really going to hold Lugia back. Though the deck will be popular for the tournament, in my opinion, there will be players who bring it. It is going to be a fairly popular one. It might even be the second to most popular deck in the tournament. But yes, Lugia does have its things holding it back, and that's why I can't justify put it higher on the list. Like I said, it's very inconsistent sometimes. Sometimes just completely sucks, and also it's easy to tech for. Just sliding in a couple of good cards like a Hammer and a Temple in your deck gives you a better matchup in a Lugia, and that is a big deal. And I do think there's a good chance that a lot of these big decks like Gardevoir and Charizard, and even potentially Reggie Drago, are going to be playing Lugia counters within the deck. I think it is most likely going to happen due to people expecting how popular this deck actually is going to be. Now, Lugia definitely is still solid, don't get me wrong. It's still a very good deck. Like, a lot of the time, if you set up quick enough and you high roll your opponent, the deck can't really lose. It's that good of a deck. But there are going to be those games where you just have really bad draws. You're reading the winning for too long, especially now against like Charizard, which usually you could afford to read the wind a couple times against Zard. Now you can't because of Dusclops. So yeah, your matchup spread has become a lot worse right now, or at least your Zard matchup has become a little bit worse. And at the end of the day, you have those bad consistency issues, and decks will counter you. But Lugia will still be a fairly strong deck for the World Championships because it is Lugia at the end of the day. And yeah, going into the tournament this weekend, I would expect to at least run into a couple of Lugia. It is going to be a popular deck. All right, and in the top 3, we have Charizard. Now, honestly, at first I thought Charizard was going to be a lot better for this tournament. Like, I thought, okay, easy top 2 pick, maybe even the best pick for the World Championships. And honestly, heading into the tournament, looking at the online tournament results, looking at the talk of the town, Charizard may not be as good as we all thought. Now, Charizard's still an A-tier deck. Like, it's still very, very strong. It is still one of the top dogs in the format. The upgrade of Dusknoir is insane, and Charizard is a very flexible deck. We might even see some different versions of Charizard do well. There's talk of the Petron Biny Mochi Charizard deck doing well, so we'll have to see where Charizard goes into the World Championships, but I do think Charizard is a very solid play. It's going to be popular. It's either going to be the second or third most popular deck this weekend, and honestly, we might even see, the normal Charizard people bring the deck, and they're going to innovate with the deck. We might see some cool innovation, some cool combos, some cool synergies, and we didn't really think of before see play within Charizard this weekend. There's a good chance that will happen. Charizard is a very strong archetype, and its matchup spread isn't bad. The one bad matchup ultimately will be your Snorlax matchup, though also your Drago matchup is a little sketchy. If Charizard can figure out how to beat Reggie Drago, then maybe we'll see Charizard do a lot better. And that's ultimately the thing that kind of holds it back is, yeah, your Drago matchup is pretty bad. And that's why I did put Dragapult a lot lower on this list due to how popular and good Drago is this weekend. I couldn't justify putting Dragapult higher on the list because it's like the same thing as playing Charizard. It's like the deck is really strong when it gets to stage 2s going. The problem is that Reggie Drago matchup is kind of scary, and they really do bully you from setting up your board fast enough. But yeah, Charizard is still pretty strong, and it will still be very good this weekend, and we'll have to see if anybody figures out anything we were missing with the deck heading into the tournament, kind of like what Tor did at EUIC with the 1-1 Bibarel in the deck. Like, even these like little small things could change everything for Charizard, and we'll have to see if that does happen this weekend at the World Championships. All right, and at the number 2 spot, we have Gardevoir, and I really do think Gardevoir is going to be pretty strong for this tournament. I don't think it's going to be as popular as stuff like Zard and Lugia will be, but I think it is a overall better play, and there's a very good chance a lot of the big-name players are going to be playing Gardevoir this weekend. Very good chance that does happen. Gardevoir is a very strong deck, and it is a flexible deck, too, where you can kind of weave in what you want to add in the deck. I think a big card people are going to be playing this weekend is the Mimikyu. Mimikyu seems to help a lot against Drago and Charizard, so good chance we're going to see Mimikyu within Gardevoir. Also, Devo is going to be a mainstay. Like, looking at this list here, this is Henry Chow's list from NEIC. I mean, looking at it, there's so many different things within this deck that kind of counter the top decks, like Mimikyu being good into Drago and Zard, Devo being good into Drago, or Zard, sorry, and then Hammer being really good into Lugia is also a big deal. So, like, Gardevoir does seem really strong. It's a deck that can counter most of the other big top decks, and it's just Gardevoir at the end of the day. You can be losing with the deck and still make an insane win and comeback. It is Gardevoir, don't forget. The one thing maybe holding Gardevoir back is time issues, especially at the World Championships. You can't really be affording to tie a lot, so that's one of the only things that kind of holds Gardevoir back a little bit from maybe being super popular, and I think that ultimately is why the deck won't be as popular as like Lugia and Charizard. But most likely, we're going to see a lot of big-name players playing Gardevoir. So going into this weekend, I think you definitely want to respect Gardevoir, and you want to kind of figure out how the deck will be built and played. Like, you probably want to do your own testing with the deck and figure out what people might be putting within their Gardevoir list this weekend, because it is a very flexible deck with a lot of room for different cards you can actually add to the deck to, fix your matchups. And, that's something that Gardevoir players are going to be looking at this weekend. And, going to the tournament, I think you definitely want to test against Gardevoir, figure out the lines, figure out how to beat the matchup, and, see if you can take Gardevoir down with your deck, because Gardevoir will be pretty big. It's going to be a deck a lot of big players are going to play. Definitely has a good chance of winning the tournament. It is Gardevoir at the end of the day. It does have a good chance of doing anything it wants and winning any game it wants, even when it's at a disadvantage. All right, let's get into the honorable mentions here before we get to the number 1 spot. The first one is Pidgeot Control. Now, this might be the best way to play the deck right now. The Luxray EX build of Pidgeot Control that's been popularized by All Out Blitzel could be the best way to play the deck. Pidgeot Control definitely feels like it is a deck still a little unexplored, maybe within this format. I think a lot of people were kind of scared of playing the deck due to its awkward potential Drago matchup, but Pidgey Control is still very strong. And we already know there's going to be people at this tournament who literally just play nothing but those control archetypes, and they're not going to be playing Snorlax. They're going to want to lean towards playing something like Pidgeot Control, and those are already going to be something you have to expect to see if you end up pairing into one of those players. Pidgeot Control is hard to play against. You don't exactly know what the heck's going on a lot of the time. You don't know what attackers, what tech cards, what Pokemon is in their deck that can counter your deck. Definitely a jack of all trades deck, but for sure Pidgeot Control is very strong still for this tournament if somebody can figure out the best way to play it, and we'll have to see where the deck goes. Wouldn't be surprised to see a Pidgey Control do well. Next up is Shenpao, another deck right now that just kind of feels like it's just kind of bubbling out of the top 10. I would consider to actually put it in the top 10. It feels like it's an okay enough deck, but hasn't really got the good line tournament results. Shenpao's still strong, though. I mean, it still abuses Iron Hands. Iron Hands is good right now. Shenpao does, in my opinion, take a pretty 50-50 matchup to, Drago. That's, like, maybe the one thing holding the deck back, and probably why I didn't include in the top 10 is your Drago matchup ultimately is a 50-50, mainly because you either get Kyurem or you get Dragapulted, and there's really nothing you do about that as a Shenpao deck. Like, if Drago just gets turned to Kyurem against you, they can take out all your Friggies. Even if you put 3 Frigibacks in play to play around a Dragapult play with Hawlucha, you can still get Kyuremed out of the game. So Shenpao definitely has its inconsistencies, but it still is like an okay deck. I mean, its Zard matchup's always been good. Your Guardy matchup might be a bit closer. There could be some room for improvement within the list itself. Like, I'm just taking a list from NEIC here. I mean, I don't really know there's any new cards in the new set added to the deck. Like, maybe Pheasantipity. I've heard murmurings of playing Pheasantipity and Shenpao over Bibarel. I'm not sure how good that actually is, but, maybe that's the way to go. But ultimately, yeah, Shenpao, it's not a terrible play for the World Championships. Like I said, wouldn't be surprised if somebody brought the deck and had an okay run with it. And then finally, I wanted to mention Lostbox, a deck that took a massive hit with the new set thanks to Kyurem. Kyurem completely bullied this deck. Lostbox, in my opinion, already was not great into Reggie Drago before Kyurem, though. Drago is just really bulky. It has Dragapult. Like, those are already pretty big issues. And also, there's Goodra, too. Like, Lostbox already had a bad Drago matchup. The fact that now they have Kyurem just solidifies that matchup is pretty dead. Like, I've thought about trying out Lost Zone again with the Roaring Moon, but I don't think Roaring Moon does enough to fix your Drago matchup. I just don't think Lostbox is in a great spot this weekend. That's why I didn't include it within the top 10. But ironically, though, outside of that really bad Drago matchup, I think everything else is actually fairly winnable. Like, your Charizard matchup's never been that bad. Your Guardy matchup, it's pretty close. Your Lugia matchup, it's not bad either. Like, Lostbox seems to beat everything that's not Drago. And if you want to play a deck that can beat everything but Reggie Drago consistently, honestly, Lostbox isn't a bad pick for the tournament. Now, I don't know if the Hedrick build here from NEIC is the best way to play it, or maybe it's better to go back to playing Roaring Moon, especially if Charizard is coming back into the format, maybe playing Devos in the deck. Could be good over Roaring Moon, or maybe there's other cool attackers. Like, I think something like Pheasantipity is something you could try adding to the deck. Pheasantipity does make the deck a lot more consistent against Iono and stuff. Like, that could be a really cool inclusion. I've even thought about playing Petra on Roaring Moon. It really makes your Snorlax matchup a lot better. Like, there are some room for Lost Zone improvements, and maybe the deck will do good. I wouldn't be surprised if a few people brought it and did well with it. Maybe the deck just flat out dodges Drago and does good. We'll have to see what goes on this weekend at the World Championships with Lostbox. And of course, at the number 1 spot, probably to nobody's surprise, we have Reggie Drago. Now, you could make the argument that Reggie Drago is not the best deck for the World Championships. And I, might agree with you. There's a good chance Gardevoir's best deck for the tournament, or Charizard is, or Lugia is. But I do think at the end of the day, Reggie Drago is going to be the most anticipated deck for this tournament. It is easily the most hyped up deck right now heading in to the World Championships. There's a good chance this deck is going to be one of the most popular, if not the most popular deck at the tournament, and you need to respect the deck. You need to beat it. You need to have a decent matchup into Drago because it's going to be very popular. And that's like maybe one of his Achilles heels right now is like everyone's expecting the deck to do really good or really popular, so everyone's going to try to beat it. They're going to respect it, and that does hold the deck back a little bit. I'm sure there are people out there who have locked in their Drago 60 or have locked in the fact that they are playing the deck no matter what, and I think you should still do that. The deck is still very good, and to be honest, outside of maybe Raging Bolt, I don't think Drago has a bad matchup at all. I think it can beat anything in the format, to be honest, due to how versatile it is. The addition of Kyurem canceling Clone, Prime Catcher just makes the deck unholy good. Pheasantipity is really, really strong in the deck. One interesting thing about playing Reggie Drago is the tech cards you want to play. So there are a few different ways you can build your list. You can add Radiant Charizard to the deck, or you could play other Dragon Pokemon. Goodra, Noivern, the new Haxorus are all decent options that I've seen float around within the deck. Also, playing a Stadium card is ideal too. I think it is worth it to play Temple of Sinnoh or even Jamming Tower within the deck. Canceling Clone, you could play a couple Clone, you could play a Turo, you can play a Penny if you want to improve your matchup into control or stall. So definitely Drago has the room for flexibility, and it is a very strong deck right now in the format. Going to the World Championships, it is one of the best decks, and you definitely don't want to be losing to it. Drago is just a deck that sometimes just goes burr. It can high roll you, get those big turn 2 KOs out of nowhere, which a lot of the time could lose you the game on the spot. Like, you might just lose literally to a Kyurem turn 2 if it happens. So, like, there's a lot of things Drago can do that can really body you. So definitely keep your eye out on this deck going to the World Championships. Test against it. Make sure you practice against it. And if you're somebody who's going to be playing the deck, make sure you build a great optimal 60 for the tournament, looking at what the big decks are going to be. But there you go, folks. That is it for the best decks for the World Championships. It's definitely an interesting tournament this year with this new fresh set. We'll have to see what does well. I'm sure there will be some cool surprises. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, there's going to be some really cool, like, under-the-radar random rogue surprise archetypes that do well. I don't know how popular that might be or how good that'll be overall due to how, like, big Drago and Gardevoir are, which seem to be decks that can bully those ideas out of the format. But we'll have to see. I'm hoping something cool happens at Worlds this year. Definitely excited to see what goes down. If you all enjoyed the video, leave a like. Let me know what you think of the ranking down in the comments below. What is your best deck for the World Championships? What do you think is the best deck in the format going into the tournament? Let me know down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We are on the road to 16,000 subs, and I'll catch you on another video. Bye-bye.